Judas, the infamous apostle who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, was a redhead. Well, at least according to the many portrayals of him through the centuries, including paintings such as Da Vinci's The Last Supper and even plays like Shakespeare's As You Like It. But nowhere in the text of the New Testament does anyone actually describe his hair color. The legend no doubt has contributed to the centuries of prejudice against gingers. We are racing through the Bible, and this is 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. Are you ready? Let's go. The two letters addressed to Timothy and one to Titus are collectively called the Pastoral Letters, not only since they are addressed to some early Christian leaders or pastors, but also because they give instructions about the qualifications and responsibilities of people who are to be overseers or shepherds of local congregations. When Paul was released from his first Roman imprisonment, he took Titus and Timothy with him to Crete to evangelize the island. Paul left Titus on Crete and went to Ephesus, where later he left Timothy on his way to Macedonia. In Ephesus, they encountered false teachers who had virtually taken over the church, just as Paul had predicted they would. Two of them, Hymenaeus and Alexander, were expelled by Paul. Paul had to press on to Macedonia, but the situation at Ephesus needed help. And so he left Timothy in charge of the church, giving him instructions to deal with the heretics who had become leaders in the church. Paul sums up the background and purpose very clearly right at the start. He writes, "As I urged you when I went into Macedonia, stay there in Ephesus so that you may command certain people not to teach false doctrines any longer." Paul stresses godly leadership in the face of internal opposition. When Paul left Timothy in Ephesus, the situation was quite urgent. That was not the case with Titus in Crete. Apparently, Paul wrote to Timothy first, and after some reflection on the very same issues, he wrote to Titus. There is great similarity between these two letters, but Titus lacks the sense of urgency found in 1 Timothy. Because Titus's church on Crete was newly planted, the main concern of Paul was that the believers begin living an exemplary Christian life so as to be an example of the grace of God to their pagan neighbors. Paul openly sums up the background and the purpose of Titus as well. He writes, "The reason I left you in Crete was that you might put in order what was left unfinished and appoint elders in every town as I directed you." Paul primarily wrote 2 Timothy to ask Timothy to come to Rome. The bottom line was that Paul was lonely. He says, "Do your best to come to me quickly." Timothy was the son of a Jewish mother who had become a Christian believer and of a Greek father. Timothy's home was in Lystra, in the Roman province of Galatia, in what is now Turkey. He was well spoken of by the Christians in Lystra and the neighboring city of Iconium. When Paul revisited the church in Lystra on his second missionary journey, he wanted this young man of sincere faith to accompany him on his mission travels as his co-worker. Paul circumcised Timothy as a matter of Christian liberty to avoid offending the Jews in that area that they would be doing missionary work with, because the Jews there knew Timothy's father was a Greek. In his letters, Paul wrote of Timothy with love and respect. He called him his son, whom he loved and who was faithful in the Lord. Paul said Timothy had a genuine spirit like his own. He said Timothy was a co-worker who was concerned about the welfare of the Christians and their churches, who sought the interests of Christ Jesus, and who was of proven worth in furthering the gospel like a child serving his father. Paul called Timothy his true son in the faith. Timothy became a close associate of Paul. He was with Paul during much of Paul's second and third missionary journeys. 6 of Paul's letters bear Timothy's name along with Paul's in the opening greeting: 2 Corinthians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and Philemon. The scriptures don't tell us much more about Timothy and his ministerial activities. The only bit of information given about Timothy is in Hebrews 13, verse 23. The writer states that Timothy had been released. Where or when or why Timothy was in prison? Well, that's not stated. In any case, the writer of the book of Hebrews was waiting for Timothy to join him so together they could visit the Jewish Christians to whom he had written. Paul also held a warm affection for Titus. He called him my true son in our common faith. Paul also called Titus my partner and fellow worker. When Paul was released from his first imprisonment in Rome, he apparently did some mission work with Titus on the island of Crete. Congregations were established in every town. Paul then appears to have traveled from Crete to Ephesus and then to Macedonia as he had intended to do. When Paul left Crete, he left Titus in charge to complete the organization of the church there, to deal with the false teachers who were upsetting the faith of whole households, and to carry on the pastoral work that still needed to be done on Crete. In his letter to Titus, Paul tells him, "As soon as I send Artemas or Tychicus to you, do your best to come to me at Nicopolis, because I have decided to winter there." The assumption is that eventually happened. Crete is a mainly mountainous island in the Mediterranean. Paul quoted a line from Epimenides, who was held in honor on Crete as a poet and prophet and religious reformer. The triple charge: Cretans are always liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons. It's supported by other extra-biblical witnesses too. The pagan moralists classified Cretans with Cilicians and Cappadocians as preeminent in wickedness. So notorious was the Cretan reputation for falsehood that the Greek word kretizo, to Crete eyes, meant to lie. Evil brutes stigmatizes them as having sunk to the level of beasts, unrestrained in their brutality, always on the prowl for prey. Lazy gluttons underlines their greed as idle sensualists who desired to be filled without ever exerting any personal effort to earn an honest living. People of Crete, Cretans, were among the earliest of Christians, being present with those gathered on the day of Pentecost, the birthday of the church after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. These letters were probably some of the very last letters that Paul wrote, probably dating as late as AD 63.